Welcome, everybody. We've got a local legend with us today. Just about everybody I know certainly knows who Stan Deyo is, and I don't want to date him, but he's been around long enough to sell 250,000 copies of just one of his books, The Cosmic Conspiracy. Now, I had lunch with Stan, probably about 8-9 months ago one day, and if you ever want to be entertained by somebody and just sit there with your jaw wide open, listening to the tales this man has and the stories he tells of being in Australia and being involved in all kinds of top secret research and UFO studies and things that the average person never gets to experience. You kind of just sit there and you just listen, and it's one story after another. So when he called me about 6 months ago, and when we invited him to the conference, he says to me, "Bob, I don't have any idea what I'm going to say." Well, I wanted to start laughing, but that would have been disrespectful because I know better. And he didn't know what message he was going to have. Well, I've never seen anyone that puts in the preparation time like Stan has for these messages. A couple years ago, he preached a message on the Garden of Eden, and Google Earth has opened up a world of vision for people, and things are coming out of this that are indescribable. And Stan has this great DVD he shot, literally on the Garden of Eden. That's at his book table. The Cosmic Conspiracy is at his book table, a book well worth reading if you have any interest in the supernatural. His wife, Holly, has also prepared a book called Dare to Prepare. And the first time I looked at it, I just kind of shook my head. I'm in awe of authors to begin with. How many pages is Holly's book? Like 632 pages.
It weighs 42 pounds.
It costs a lot of money to ship. But I've never seen a more comprehensive survival guide in my life. In fact, I'm not a survivalist. I'm not preparing for the tribulation. But I have a copy of Holly's book on my bookshelf at home just in case. And it must have like 1,000 chapters in it. I mean, anything you could possibly think of that could go wrong, the Deyos are prepared for. So I just want to welcome Stan to the stage. So grateful and appreciative to have you here.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Like Indy Jones, hey. Okay, Now, Bob mentioned that I found the Garden of Eden in 2014 and presented it here. I noticed when he rang me and said, look, find something to talk about, you know, you'll find it. And I thought, well, I'll just do an update on the Garden of Eden lecture. And I looked at this slide I had in that lecture, and it showed this arrow going down, which you can see from the top there, going down into the Gulf of Mexico, showing where the Chicxulub meteor impacted, and I said, and it would have sent a shockwave across over under the Indian Ocean, shoved India up in the Himalayas and caused the flood. And at that time, that was the biggest thing we could find on the planet that would have caused the flood, because it was catastrophic and broke up the mantle. Well, anyway, I will just run this little video here for you. Here comes the Chicxulub hitting it, and coming out there. See how it bulges up there? Now, right where it comes out of the Indian Ocean was where I thought the shockwave was. Well, so I started looking there to see if there were any signs, and I actually found an asteroid impact, the biggest one that's ever been found. We're still trying to get the mainstream to accept it. 250-mile wide crater. We're going to show you that in a minute. It was really quite impressive. Okay, there's a little bit of the story there for you. Okay, sorry about that slide. Okay, now, where you saw that arrow come out, it was only about 200 miles south of where the actual large, much larger Cuddapah asteroid hit. And it did make a hole in the ocean and pushed a lot of stuff that was in the surface other places, which I'm going to show you. And it did so many more things. Anyway, I found this asteroid, and I thought, wow, this is really great. I can at least talk about the asteroid and correct that mistake. And then I thought, when did that asteroid hit? Was it morning or afternoon? Not that it makes a lot of difference, but because it's coming from outside the orbit of Earth toward the sun, because they come down that way most of the time, and the Earth is turning, it would have to have been in the early morning hours that it struck the planet. And so I thought, well, that was interesting, so we'll investigate the impact. Now, because, I'll show you the next slide, because an asteroid doesn't always hit straight down and make a big splash. Sometimes it can come in at a shallow angle to the planet. This one did, and it came in at an angle of 35 degrees, which meant that it had the potential to skip out, even though it hit and bounced. We don't think it did, but it did a lot of damage where it did hit. It was 15 miles in diameter, which we can tell from the impact crater you'll see here in the next slide. Now, if you'll notice in the middle of that white circle, there's a little tiny elliptical hole. And the Scripps Institute gave me this data you're seeing here. That little hole is an ellipse. If it had hit straight on, it would have been perfectly round. So by measuring the ellipse and the angle of it, we can tell that it was a 35-degree angle strike. Now, what we're looking at here is the east coast of India today. Outside that white circle, kind of in the pink, where it says 15-mile asteroid number, you go into the pink, that's the edge of a 250-mile crater. Now, the Indian scientists have been saying for some time, the Cuddapah Basin must be caused by an asteroid, but they couldn't find where this asteroid was in that little elliptical hole. Well, that's what got me on the search for finding that. The yellow up there is where the edge of that crater is today. Now, India was not always here. I'll show you the next slide. India actually was further down in the lower left of your screen when this thing hit. And when it hit, it splashed, it shoved 6 million square miles. It shoved a big scoop like that over toward Indonesia and New Guinea, and shoved continents that way, and India up into the Himalaya mountains. Where the blue is where it actually hit. Where the yellow is, and the rest of India, is where India ended up and the edge of the crater. That's why they could never find it, because the hole is in the dirt in the seabed right underneath that blue. It's a perfect round hole, and it was covered by the seabed between Sri Lanka and the southern tip of India. The black areas show where Australia and Indonesia, New Guinea, and India were at the time of the impact. The straight arrow shows the vector, the direction of the impact of the meteor. The curved arrow obviously goes over to where we are today, and you can see how Australia was swung up to the upper right, and New Guinea as well. Now, where that curved arrow stops is called the Banda Sea. That's the name of it. They didn't realize, and they still haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to show them, that sea is where the asteroid that hit the ocean there either stopped or exited the planet. Well, I'm still kind of iffy about whether it stayed with us or not because of the shape of the bowl that it left there, the whole sea basin. I was telling you about the sediment there between Sri Lanka and the tip. See that circular arrow where the white arrow is? That's the actual hole that was left and then covered as India's surface moved up over it. The mass in between Sri Lanka and the tip of India fell down into the crater, leaving just up where the top part is, that Kudapa impact today, just leaving the left rim of it. The rest of it got shoved over into Indonesia and to the Banda Sea. In the next slide that's coming, you'll see that this impact created a huge area in the Indian Ocean of depression. It pushed the Earth down over 6 million square miles on an average between 50 and 350 feet deep. And it shoved stuff over toward where New Guinea is today, underneath the mantle, pushed it up, and raised the Earth on the other side between 50 and 280 feet over an equal area of about 6 million square miles. And when you see this next slide from NASA, you'll understand why. The Earth was also tilted 23.4 degrees by the impact. The purple area here is where the scoop, the main part of it, occurred. You can just see the tip of the tip of India up above the start of that yellow arrow. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. Let me see if I can get a little pin up here. There we go. Hopefully that makes a mark. You can just barely see that even. Anyway, right in the center of that is the start of that arrow, and the scoop was shoved over into New Guinea. Now you might think, okay, it hits like this, shoves stuff over. What does that have to do with, say, the Middle East and the flood, of Noah? What we found with the records from various oil geology reports is that when it hit, it splashed a bunch of seabed back up over Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. It sank that end with about 10,000 feet of ophiolite, which is sea mantle and seabed. Now, when it sank that end of Saudi Arabia, it lifted up the other end in Europe. And this did some rather interesting things. Now, see, I'm taking you on the path that I went, looking for this rather than Atlantis. And this is what led me to Atlantis. I just want you to follow the logic because I didn't start out that way. Holly will tell you that when it started to dawn on me what I had, that I'd call her down and say, come look at this, come look at this. This is Atlantis, and wow, and everything I was discovering I'm going to show you, but it was just amazing, the stuff that came out of it. Now, this video here, if I run it, it will just go fast. I suppose you can see what's happening. I just wanted to show you the exaggerated bulge of the planet. The blue is the depression, the red is the raised area. What we're talking about here in this particular asteroid is only one of 5 that I've found. 5 huge asteroids that hit us and raised an area over 6 million square miles in the North Atlantic, made a huge depression, which is part of China's desert. All these things came out of just that one correction I was trying to do. So trying to correct a mistake led to all this. Now, this is only one of the 6 that are on the planet that have been identified. Now, mainstream science has accepted the fact that what's called the Eltanin asteroid at the southern tip of Argentina scooted through the seabed like that, and you can see the path where the orange line is, all the way over to where it stopped and left that rim. So, did the asteroid just melt? Was it a comet? Did it go down into the seabed, or did it exit the planet? If it had exited the planet, we think it would have left debris beyond where those little colored dots are off to the right of your screen. So we think it did stop there. What is interesting is all the other impacts I found like this, Where it stopped, there are numerous earthquakes all the time. It's weakened the surface of the earth at that point. So a lot of the things on the west coast, like of South America, like Chile, Peru, Ecuador, are the result of large meteors like this that hit a long time ago, weakening the surface of the seabed there, so that when there's stresses, we have earthquakes. Remember this signature, what it looks like, this scooting path and then that rim on the right. The other impacts that I found, the red arrow is down into China, into the Taklamakan Desert in northwest China. The blue one is the one that we were just talking about, what I'm calling the Kurapa. And as we go around, the red one was the Chinese one. The yellow one is near Manila, and it formed this kind of hook shape that you'll see in Google Earth and on your maps. Very deep crevice there. And although I didn't put it in here, there is another meteor impact at right angles to the yellow one coming down from the top. It's a smaller one, so I didn't bother with it because it get in the way. But this formed the Marianas Trench, which is one of the deepest trenches in the ocean. And the green one over here is one of two. The purple one down there is the Altanan one we just looked at. The green one is one of a couple more that I haven't shown on here, but the green one goes right into that nook, or that little, like, indentation on South America, Ecuador, and you can see the outline of the crater that it formed when it pushed matter into there. We have a lot of earthquakes in that region, Chile and Peru. Now, remembering the signature I just showed you, see the pathway where the Kudapa, the one over India that caused the flood, where it scooted through Indonesia and stopped, and where that is pointing, that arrow there where it says formed by Kudapa asteroid, that is the band of sea today, and you can see the outline of the fluid flow from that meteor moving through the Earth's crust. Now, what does this have to do with the flood? Okay, well, I found the flood thing, and I thought, right, this threw ejected back up onto the Arabian Peninsula, and it shoved all that stuff over into New Guinea, okay, and it would have broken up the surface of the Earth, so the fountains of the deep would have been broken up. It would have been hot water because it was down in the Moho discontinuity. It would have boiled the seawater up in the impact, and it would have condensed and been rain. All of it fit for the flood. But Atlantis came to mind then, because I'd written about it when I wrote about the Garden of Eden originally in 1989. And I started checking my notes, and I thought, golly, I wonder if that sank Atlantis, because, people aren't sure it existed, but if it did, then this would explain how earthquakes and flood destroyed the Atlantean population. And if you look at it from a biblical point of view, the Atlantean population were a hybrid race of off-worlders, superhumans, and humans, which was anathema to God. That's why he sent the flood in the Noah's tale. So I thought, are the two talking about the same thing? Like the watchers here you see in Genesis 6:4. I don't know that they were 450 feet tall. I put that in there because that's what some of the sources say. But these giants were Atlanteans. In the book of Enoch, they say there were 200 fallen ones, or fallen angels, that descended onto Mount Hermon. Other authors don't put, the number on it. The sons of God, came to earth. And I think what has happened is that we've centered on the Atlantean tale, which is about one of them named Poseidon, because that's the only record that survived, after the library at Alexandria was destroyed. But there were other angels, fallen ones, super beings, that went over to Central America, went up into Europe, and they had the same technology, pyramids and stuff. That's why we have this similarity. And they did this before the continent split, before Pangea split. Now, before you get excited, if you're a technical person or a scientist, I am basing everything I tell you on the young Earth hypothesis or theory, because there's a growing cadre of scientists that are saying, yes, the Big Bang occurred, and it was a tight little compact ball, and everything was compressed together. It was so dense that light traveled 10 with 60 zeros after it faster. So this meant that all radiocarbon-14 dating, all radiometric dating, needs to be adjusted by this super tight curve. When you do that, then you get down to within 100,000 years for the age of the entire universe, and we start talking about parallel universes and virtual realities, and this fits in with the Bible perfectly. So using that, I'm saying that Pangea, the original landmass, did not split 100 million years ago. It split in 2345 BC, plus or minus about 50 years. That makes a difference. I asked myself, if this is the same flood, as you can see up there, was Noah a citizen of Atlantis? Which would be really cool, because he was the only pure bloodline that God wanted to preserve out of that population. So Noah had an Atlantean citizenship. Now, the clues. Let's find Atlantis. That'd be fun. The clues that Plato gave were from dialogue that his kind of relative Solon got from an Egyptian priest in a place called Sais, off of a stone stela that was much older than the priest was, for sure. The description said that Atlantis was an island greater in extent. This is English straight translation by Jowett. It was greater in extent than Libya and Asia. Now, what does that extent mean? Now, was it that it had more shoreline, or that it had a bigger area? Did it mean it was laying in between ancient Libya and Asia Minor, which we'll look at in the next slide in a second? The reason this is important is that most people think of Atlantis, the legend, as this little circular island with moats and a little capital in the middle, and it sank, and we're looking for that little 11-mile diameter island. It's there, we found it, but that is just the capital offshore of the main island, which no matter whether you take coastlines, which the Greeks and the Egyptians could have done, I don't know if they could have done area, but even if they did, I calculated the area of ancient Libya, ancient Asia Minor. I had to trace those things at about 10 feet at a time in Google Earth and get a summary of the area. And what you come up with is where that orange was Atlantis. Its coastline matches the white coastlines of Asia Minor and ancient Libya. It's in between them. If you want to say extent means between them, because later on in his dialogue he says it had influence in Asia Minor up into Europe, and Atlantis had influence over into Libya. Well, okay, I thought, okay, we've got the potential for this place to be here. It's 1.3 million square miles itself. Now, I told you before, when the Kudapa meteor hit in the Indian Ocean, it threw backwash up over where you see it says Atlantis South. That's the south part of the Arabian Peninsula. And I did this before the geologists gave me their data. And what it did was it pushed the southern part of Saudi Arabia down like that, and the northern part up. What this did was it stopped the water flow from the Mediterranean through what was in those days called the Atlantic, which is now called the Persian Gulf. It stopped the water flow, raising up the land over there between Syria and Turkey, and so no one looked there for an island. But if you talk to the Bedouins in Saudi Arabia, the old ones, they say the old men, the men of the olden times, called Saudi Arabia or Arabia an island. And when you look in the geological record, sure enough, there was evidence that it was an island. So then, after seeing this, I went to plot that kind of square mile by square mile many times, seeing where the water would have flowed. I took Google Earth and I generated a little blue polygon to drop over it like it had water, so I could sink it down and see what stuck up above the water. And I only had to sink it down 1,700 feet, and I had water over in the border between Syria and Turkey, bordering into the Mediterranean. And when the geologist contacted me, which I'll show you his data in a minute, he was over in Mongolia, and he Skyped me. I'd never met him before, and he said, "Look, I heard you talking on the Hagman show about this. Here's something you need to see." 3,000 meters of debris was dropped onto Saudi Arabia, about 10,000 feet. His name is Earl Edmonds, and he's an American from California. He's worked in the oil industry for quite some time. And he shared data with me, much more than I'm going to show you here. Sonic tests, seismic testing so that they could see where the layers were underneath Oman, which is on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And, you know, let me just go to his slide there. I'm not going to bore you with all this stuff, but it is there. You can look at it later on the DVD. What he wanted to prove was that the seabed in the Indian Ocean, in the Arabian Sea there, had been thrown up over and had sunken Saudi Arabia. And this is a very controversial thing in the geological circles. But he's presented his own PowerPoint on this, of which he kindly shared a few slides with me. And it does prove what I was making as a hypothesis about what happened to push up that part of the Mediterranean. They call this formation over what I'm going to show you here in Oman that he sent me, the sea-male ophiolite of the Hajar Mountains of Oman. But basically, it's where they were looking for oil, and they had done a cross-section across the Oman, where you can see that red dot there in the Persian Gulf. They ran a line to the right of that and down diagonal, left to right like that. Oh, left to right like that for you. Anyway, and they had done the cross-section to see how much of this stuff had fallen on southern Arabia and fallen into the empty quarter called the Rub al-Khali. And this next graph, we're about through with graphs, the green is this ophiolite deposit that they mapped, and then there's ophiolite from the mantle, so there's crust and mantle sections of it. So all the brown or the tan and the green was a debris that was dropped onto Oman. And we're looking at Oman here, and if you look down at the lower part in the left corner of the picture there where it says A and A primed, that's where the slice went through Oman. And you can see the depth of the ocean crust and the mantle that were thrown up over Oman. And this is, you know, scientific proof of what I was saying, that did happen. And he was excited because he'd been looking for the meteor that could have done that, or the catastrophic event, and mine was in the right spot with the right amount of energy. And by the way, that Kudapa asteroid was like 15 times the energy of the Chicxulub that hit into the Gulf of Mexico. That's 1,500%, like it was big. Plato goes on to describe, quoting, he says, "Now in this island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire which had rule over the whole island and several others, blah, blah, blah. The men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Hercules, as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyre. Everybody thought that in Plato's time they were talking about the Rock of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules, and good guess to make at the time. But when you correct the water levels, we find a new location for the Pillars of Hercules, which fits in with what the ancient Greeks were using as a seaport long after Atlantis had sunk and long after the Great Flood. Now, in one place in the Plato account, he talks about them as the Pillars of Hercules, and in another place, the Straits of Hercules. Now, a strait, in sea terms, is large sea here, connected by a very narrow channel of water. And when we look at this map here, the very top of your screen on the right there, where that little red outline is, where it stops and hits the yellow outline, right at that little spot in the Mediterranean is where the real Strait of Hercules was. It was a straight channel from the Mediterranean into the blue water you see there, which is the Persian Gulf expanded to where it used to be. And in the old days, that was called the Atlantic. It wasn't the one out in between the United States and Europe. It was there. Let's see here. Let's have a look at that from the sea. This is the Straits of Hercules, in that area I just showed you the map zoomed up. And you can see these large mountains, the left and the right there, on either side of that yellow arrow that says the Straits of Hercules. That is where you entered to go into Atlantis. And if you follow the blue water around, you zigzag around, do a little bit of a turn, and then you head into the old Atlantic, or the Persian Gulf, and Atlantis is an island within that. Good. Okay, this power, Atlantis, came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, Well, it wasn't the Atlantic that we're talking about if they're talking about something you can't navigate. And there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Hercules, or Heracles. The island was larger than Libya, ancient Libya, and Asia put together. And ancient Libya went all the way up to Morocco and up to the side of Egypt as we know it today. It was big, as you saw in that earlier graph. Okay, and okay, it was larger than that. Okay, and was the way to other islands, and from these you might pass the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. So going into the old Atlantic, the Persian Gulf, you could go into another ocean which was beyond India, because India was scooted up to there, and there was a river, and there was an ocean between Madagascar, the east coast of Africa, and what was India at those days, before it got shoved up into the Himalayas. Okay, has a narrow interest, right, okay. Now, again, with the zoomed up picture, you see this little orange rectangle. We're going to talk a lot about that. That's called the plain, the fertile plain of Atlantis. Libya, over on the left side, you can see the white line, which is the right side of the border of ancient Libya. You can see how big it was. And the Straits of Hercules, you can see that up there. Now, a lot of people have said, you know, Santorini, the island of Santorini, you can see it up there in the Greek Isles. That was the capital island of Atlantis because of the frescoes they found after the explosion that destroyed that area there, the volcanic explosion. There's some very nice pillars, red, black stones. There's pictures of bulls with the long horns like an auroch. Those are on the Santorini Island frescoes that they've uncovered. And for all the world, it looks like what Plato was describing as the royal court of Atlantis because they worshiped the bull and had games built around the bull, and the bull jumping from the front to the end and bouncing off of him onto the dirt there and surviving. Now, I'm pretty sure that since Plato said elsewhere in his documents that there was a war starting between the Atlanteans and the ancient Greeks, that this was like an outpost. As I said to you, there were a number of sons of God around, but as far as, or angels, fallen angels, as far as Poseidon, which is the one that formed Atlantis, that might have been an outpost for his people there, and it might have come after the flood. I doubt it, because so many people were killed, obviously. But that's why the frescoes are very similar to what Plato describes in the capital island. If you'll notice over to the right of the picture there, I've put the red and the blue circles showing where the impact crater of Cutupai is now, where it originally formed, and that tells you the relationship there, how it splashed up all the stuff onto the southern part of Saudi Arabia. It's interesting, the Saudis do not want anyone flying over certain areas of Saudi Arabia and photographing it. We had to get a little bit sneaky with some other sources to even get underneath even what Google Earth had, because it's all blurred out, and found some very interesting things. But I can understand why they did that, and I'll tell you that in a few minutes. Now, that orange rectangle is called the plain. Plato says it was for the most part rectangular and oblong, and where it fell out of straightness, because of the circular ditch, they cut through the ditch and made it a regular rectangle. Now, I'm showing you where this is to start with, but I had to look all over that area with some very high resolution maps from NASA to find a plain that would be 220 miles wide and 330 miles long and have a curve in it that they had to cut through. I went up north of there, I went south of there into the Rub al-Khali, and when I say I went there digitally, and down underneath and scoured just zillions of square miles looking for the various factors that Plato said were in that plain. It's a very important way to find where the actual capital island is or was. Okay, now that plain, where the orange is, it was excavated to the depth of 100 feet, and it was about 50 feet wide, I believe. It's one stadium wide anyway, Greek measure. And it was 10,000 or 10,000 stadia, which is like 880, I think it is, miles around. I was translating Greek stadia to miles. But anyway, it tells you the perimeter of this rectangle. And the reason it's important is elsewhere in Plato's account, He says it's 110 miles wide by 330 long. And this confused the issue for a long time, trying to find a little narrow one rather than this fat one. But the majority of evidence in his account does say that it was this fat one, 220 by 330. And these canals that they dug, or the canal going around that rectangular thing, caught, it said, rainfall from the mountains and as they flowed toward the sea. And on the seaside of Atlantis, said there were huge tall mountains, which you see here as pink underneath the word Old Atlantic Sea. That's the Iranian mountains. So we knew we were getting close when we started putting the orange rectangle, the plain, in that area, or up slightly or down slightly. And there were other reasons why we did that, but as I'm saying, you're getting a final result after many weeks of fiddling around. The whole country was said by Plato to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea, and there you have it. Now, if you look over the top of Atlantis from the east, kind of, I guess from the north, we're looking that way toward the south. This is what it looked like. This is where the water surrounded it. Now, you have up here where, in the upper right here, where it says Straits of Heracles, to the left of that is the Sinai Peninsula, that little triangle. And you see two waterways there, and you see one waterway that went into northern Israel, underneath the Sea of Galilee, and down through the Jordan River into the Red Sea. All this made it an island, and you can see how it was broken up. It wasn't truly a deep sea. In the right-hand side of the picture, you see little islands as it goes up toward the Mediterranean. But that's the Straits of Hercules that you had to get through, that narrow passage, to get to the main Atlantic Ocean at that time. Now, they do mention, and not only Plato, but other records and Sumerian records, say about that area becoming a mud heap. You couldn't pass. It was originally mud from the bottom of the Atlantic Sea there. And so when it was tilted up like that, it dried over a period of years. And people started to migrate to that area to rebuild civilization. Now, it does indicate that there's some chance that we know that the giants reappeared in Israel after the flood. And there's conjecture that either they reinfested the earth with these giants, or that they did survive in the high places. Whatever the reason was, there were some apparent survivors, and God had Joshua go in there and kill off every man, woman, child, donkey, anything that lived in the cities where these beings were, because they had polluted gene pool. And Holly and I visited with the Hopi Indians at their invitation, and their legend says that portions of them were saved by the spider woman, some kind of a super being, that hid them into a cave underground when the flood came over. Now, in the Hebrew account of the flood, it does say that Haaretz was destroyed. Now, that can mean the country, the land, or the red dirt. And the Egyptian record survived and said that they were saved by the flow of the Nile, taking the surge of water that came and routing it around where they were hiding in the mountains. If you have an asteroid hit, which obviously did happen, it sends tidal waves or tsunami waves around the planet several times. It just floods the entire planet. So, okay, maybe there were other survivors. It's not germane to this discussion, but I did want to bring it up because it's the obvious question when you say somebody went down to Qatar and somebody went down to Bahrain, and they formed a civilization that worshipped the bull again, and they copper-plated stone columns like legendary Atlantis did, but that was after the flood and after Atlantis was destroyed. These are the positions that I tried for the fertile plain, 220 by 330 miles. And each of these positions had to have a part of it touching the Persian Gulf or the Atlantic Sea at that time, because right off the tip of this fertile plain had to be a little 11-mile diameter circular island with concentric circles in it that was Poseidon's island. Now, Poseidon, according to the Platonic legend, descended. He was one of several that came to the earth, obviously, and he liked an earth woman named Cleito, and he stayed with her and her mother and father on a kind of a hill, not a big mountain, but a hill, until her parents died. Then he married her, and they had 5 sets of twins, and it goes on with the story of the kings. But Yeah. Uh, the first pair is an important one because it tells us how to locate where one of them lived, because even today that area carries the same name in the Middle East. The Poseidon took the island, and it was about 5.5 miles from the mainland, but close to the fertile plain. So that's how we were able to put the two factors together. It said because he was a god, little g god, he was able to cut perfect circles around there and make moats and land areas, and to cut a channel so that you could get into it eventually. It didn't happen to start with, but anyway, he wanted a safe place for him and his bride and his children away from the mainland, because the people, it said, in the mainland did not have sea technology yet. They couldn't even go 5 miles in a boat over to get to him, so it was a little safe zone. As time passed, they cut a channel from the mainland, from the fertile plain, straight over and into the circular island, through the moats and right to his capital island, or where he dwelt, the castle was. Eventually, they don't say whether Poseidon died or flew off or whatever, but he is out of the picture, and his sons, by this earth woman, ruled Atlantis for some time. Now, there were about 7 different locations. You can't see it too well, and I don't think. Pull that slide up again. You can't see it too well, but those little red dots are some of the 7 locations that I checked in great detail to be Poseidon's island, the circular rings. And what finally did it for me, well, you can look at this location here, and you can see that we're looking at the upper part of the picture is the Mediterranean up there and to the left. And that little red circle in between those 2 arrows was one of the potential areas for Poseidon's island. And it had to be close, by 5.5 miles, to the coastline of this fertile plain. Down at the bottom, that pink area is between those 2 arrows, and it shows that the water was flowing from the mountains down through that area. And so I said, okay, does it hit where that red circle is? And it wasn't quite on the mark. So then I went to the next one, did the same thing. You can see how it dips down from the mountains in the center there, in between those 2 red arrows, and then there were 2 possible Atlantis capitals right there, Abu Ali and Dammam. Then went to the next one, and this one was a little hard to stretch, but there's a place called Sarbanayas, which is that little red circle there off the coast, and the rest of this down underneath is the empty quarter. So looking at all those, I thought, we've got a problem here. So I'm going to go to NASA, to NASA, and I actually talked to an astronaut that took the pictures. I didn't tell him what I was up to start with, because he certainly would have laughed, but he was very helpful, and I'm going to draw this line. Can we see that red line around there? Okay. In the middle of that, it just really stood out of all of the high resolution, there's a very high resolution picture of the Saudi Peninsula. You can see these streaked grooves, which are part of the rain transportation system down to this plain. Out of all that, this little pimple down here that you see stood out, circular pimple. So immediately I got the ruler out and measured it, and it was the right diameter. So I got down deeper into that with the visual maps as well as the terrain maps like that, and I found only one place that worked. The Abu Ali did not. That's up at the top, about right here. Come on, give me a pen. Right here. For the longest time, when I first started doing this research in '89, I thought that that was going to be Poseidon's island, broken up, but it's not. Where you see these red pins, they're across the Persian Gulf from each other. Over on the right, you have Bandar-e-Kagan, which has a hot thermal spring. This is important because in the Plato document it says that wherever he placed his island, he had caused 2 water springs to come up, and they're rare in the area. And one was hot water and one was cold water. And we can see here that this area did at that time, and even today still has hot water springs available. Now, if you look at it from the air, let's see, the top of the picture is looking kind of west, and we're looking into the Saudi Arabian plain. And you can see where the yellow shading is. That's the edge of the plain and how it drained into the ocean. And in those days, where you see the 5.5 miles from the plain and that double-ended arrow there, where you see that was sea. It separated the main island from the sea, and from the land, and there was sea in between. Now, over on the left, where it says drain from the plain, there had to be a drain coming off the plain that passed by the city of Atlantis, the capital island, and went into the deep water to make a deep water port. And again, this is the only area there and off to the right here where you can see little fingers in the lower right coming off the island, where you have a deep water seaport available today. Interestingly enough, Dammam Island, D-A-M-M-A-M, is a dome, a water dome in the area. And it is where, after World War II, an American geologist went over and talked to the sheikh that was owning the property and said, look, we'd like to drill for oil here. Now the sheikh thought, okay, fine. He owed, Saudi Arabia owed a lot of money. They were broke at the time, didn't have the oil wells they've got today. And the seventh well the American geologist dug there, struck lots of oil. And he gave the Saudi sheikh $50,000 in gold. And the explosion of wealth of Saudi Arabia began here in the ashes of Poseidon's Island. And right in the very center of that is where he had his castle. Looking at that island, we were just looking at sideways, you can see up here where it says the old channel to seaport. That was one of the two places I was just talking about. These little red and blue circles are red is land, blue was a moat dug in that area. And again, it matches the exact dimensions that Plato gave for his island. This is a water map showing the Dammam water dome. It's the only place in the area that has water welling up to form this dome, which he drilled down into to get the fresh water hot and cold. And here's a side view of the Dammam recharge dome. Again, looking like a pimple there. That's what made that rise in the NASA document there. You had to have that to fulfill that part of the description of Poseidon's Island. Now, after Alexander the Great, this was years later, after the fall of Alexander the Great, or when he died and his kingdom was divided into the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, the Ptolemies formed what's called the Greek Decapolis cities, and they were religious cities that were in Jordan. One of them is in Israel. I actually visited it when they were excavating it. It's called Scythopolis there, just across the Jordan from a place called Gadara. And Gadara was named after Guiderius, which was Poseidon's number 2 son. His number 1 son was Atlas, and number 2 son, a twin of Atlas, was Guiderius. And so even today, they call that the Gades plate or Gadara, which is where he lived. Over toward, it said in the Plato account, over toward the Pillars of Hercules, which is just, in your picture, it's just slightly north of that where I was showing you originally. So it all fits. That these pieces are what Plato was talking about. Let me see, I've got a few notes here. We can skip over that. Now here, this is an animation I made, which took a little bit of compute power. It ran overnight for a while. This is kind of what it looked like at Dammam before the flood and the destruction of Atlantis. What you see there is dirt, the tan color, and the water is over the dirt underneath the tan color. And the tan color to the upper right of your picture is the coast where the fertile plain was, the coast of Saudi Arabia at the time. And we're going to zoom down on that. Whoops. Zoom down on it like this. And that's where eventually they say they left a statue plated in gold, etc., to Poseidon. Now, what is important about this is that these rings of land and of moat are exactly to the dimensions that Plato gave. There was a channel cut, as I said earlier, from the coast of the edge of this plate straight into the circles where Poseidon dwelt with Cleito. This is important. You'll see why in a minute. Notice the ratio of this, the length of the cut, and then the size of the little circle at the end of it. Now, another proof that this was Atlantis is that they had a mystery metal that coated one of those rings that we just looked at. Actually, I suppose I should show you that. The island had rocks around it. The brass color, the tin color, and the reddish copper-looking color was called orichalcum. And according to the Platonic account, it was a more rare than gold. And it was highly prized because they could coat the rocks with this, and it didn't corrode in the seawater. So what would be more precious than gold and wouldn't corrode? Well, I looked all through Saudi Arabia for mines that were 3000 BC or so before the Great Flood, and I did find one, huge one. And in that mine, they were mining copper, zinc, lead, gold, silver, lots of it. And I found by looking through a lot of metallurgy books that there is an alloy of brass, it's called gunmetal in some cases, that is reddish, it's ductile, you can pound it like gold and bend it around rocks, resistant to seawater corrosion. And this thing is exactly the ratio of the ore that is dug out of this mine in western Saudi Arabia, even today. So we're looking at orichalcum, the mystery metal they couldn't find is basically copper, but it's a brass type alloy. And we found that, and as I say, it matches the ratio we needed perfectly for this non-corrosive type malleable metal that was red in the sunlight. The mine is called the Mad Dahab mine, and you can look it up, and it does have veins of copper, iron, lead, and zinc sulfide, which have the ratio that I've just shown you within about 10% for the copper, and also some native gold and silver. But you're looking at what orichalcum, the mystery metal, was that coated the stones and the rings surrounding the various portions of the Poseidon's island. Now, what I find interesting about this, among other things, is that the ratio of those rings and the channel cut to it appears in other structures around the planet, possibly made by other fallen angels, maybe not from Atlantis, but the same lot. Or it was people remembering Atlantis, Poseidon's island, and carving things to match it. Remember, Stonehenge is made of stones, and it has like what would be an ancient seaport look coming in from the side. And over in the Golan Heights, in what's called the Rings of Gilgal, where the giants lived, where King Og the giant lived, we see, again, concentric circles, and you can see the remnants of a path cut into it. Now, there are over 1,400 of these things I found in Google Earth. Look at the picture. Look at these small straight lines with circles and a dot in the middle of it. Some of them are straight lines. Some of them are like a keyhole, and they call them the keyhole formations. No one knows why they're there, but I'm telling you, in the next slide or two, I'm going to show you what they are. And I've shown here a few of these formations. There you see a road that's got the two straight lines going back to circles, and then the one straight line going back to a circle. And you think, why were they making all these? What was it for? There's some more. And some more there. And these were rather unusual. It was a straight one with a circle on it, and then the one that had the keyhole looking, the two straight lines coming into the center circle. And they were outlined. The Arabians have put some kind of a fence around it. And in this area, it's hard to get a clear photograph of it. There are several, I think about 4 of these pairs cordoned off with a fence around them. Now, if that was related to Atlantis, well, here's some more. If that was related to Atlantis, why did they have those 2 symbols together, unless maybe it related to, here's another one, to Poseidon and his wife? Either a memory or a grave, I'm not sure. See these things here? See the little like crossbars in this keyhole looking? There's something that goes through there. It's a way symbolically to represent, I'm pretty sure, Poseidon's island. And there are over 1,400 of these. Now, let's look at the next slide here. I took one of those long ones and just reduced it. Didn't change its aspect or anything else. I just scaled it down to my drawing that I made from Plato's account. Look at how it fits perfectly with the length of the channel cut into the center. Do you see that? Then I took the other one, and I did it from the outer ring to the inner. That represents Cleito, I thought, his wife, in the inner sanctum where he took care of her. Poseidon went, had control over a much larger area, so that's probably why he had the straight one that went out so far. So I think that what we're seeing in Stonehenge and a lot of the other things that we've found in the stone carvings in South America and in the United States, where they have these spirals, they have that channel cut through to the center. And I think these all relate back to the memory, whether it be race memory or tribal memory, whatever, to Poseidon's island here. There's a little bit better picture of the straight one and the keystone one. On the ground, these kind of things look like this. Not impressive. From the ground, you can't see this. It has to be in the air, which is interesting. If you think about it, why did they make all these symbols if you can't see them from the ground? I mean, on the ground, they're just rocks, black rocks about that high, and you can't even see the pattern from the ground. So it had to be seen from the air. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's see if we can find out anything else from the air that looks good. And in this area here, we call it the Dumat al-Jandal. And in that red outline, it's the only place I could find in Saudi Arabia at the moment that had these interesting lines. Look at that. They're carved straight through the stone. And if you look at it from the air, it's streets-like. And this is a large area. So what made this? Why did they make this? Now here is a pyramid that I found in the middle of the Saudi desert, which is a very small, shallow pyramid. And at the top of it is a set of stone rings where they worshiped. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's look at it from the side. Let's spin around this and see what we see. Now watch for sharp line ridges around that central point. These are the edge of some structure that's covered up by the desert sand. See the edges? Now I've counted 3, maybe 4 edges to that. So it might be, triangular structure or a proper 4-line structure. The Saudis don't know what that is either. Well, they say they don't. Interesting thing, in the Persian Gulf, if you look on your map and the travel brochures, you'll find that they have a very nice resort on the Persian Gulf, on the side of Arabia there, called Atlantis. And then if you look over here, recent times over on the Red Sea on the other side of Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have made a deal with Sudan, and they're doing joint mining operations of the Red Sea off the shore of Jeddah, very close to where that mine was I was telling you about that made the orichalcum. And they have 2 mineral projects going there, Atlantis 1 and Atlantis 2. And I just have to wonder, do they really know at the royal level that they were Atlantis in the old days? Even Lawrence of Arabia, who was a writer as well, said that there was a lost Atlantis of the sands that the Bedouins couldn't find. So I'm telling you, the clues are there. This is Atlantis. There were other formations too, which beg explanation. I'm not sure how we do this. See this yellow junk, that's kind of muddy water, and it's got some kind of a structure built around it. And if you look to the upper left of your picture, you'll see, they call it a kite, a K-I-T-E. And the archaeologists say, well, it was to herd animals into it. But it just doesn't work when you have such a wide opening as these 2 lakes down here. And I mean, how are you going to get that wide of an area and run animals into a little pen down here in the upper left? That explanation doesn't work. I don't have a better one. Here's another version of those kites. And they have negative curvature to the walls, as though you could stand where the points on the upper left, you could stand on those points, and you could defend that area. Troops trying to get in, you could hit them from behind from those points, maybe. But there are so many of these. They're just all over Arabia and all over in the Jordan. They're common, and they have differing shapes or aspect ratios, but basically two legs going out and then that hollow end. There's another one. And as I say, there are a bunch of these. Now here is something interesting. In addition to this, two arms coming out in this kite shape at the end of it there, we're seeing these little circles that aren't perfectly round and they're clustered together. And there are a lot of those as well. There, as I say, with all these total, there are about 1,400. So one day we'll figure out what they were doing there and why. In India, you can, well, this is not the Indian one, this is another one, but you can see in this country here in the stone carvings, the rings of Poseidon's Island and the groove cut into it. This is in, let's see, we've got them in Italy, Spain, England, Sardinia, and in the Navajo land. Let's have a look. That must be Spain. This is in England, no, that's in the Navajo there. Look, we've seen this many times, and you can see where that character in the lower right is. He's got like a bridge or a channel going through into the core of the island, and a god figure on the left of it. Poseidon was called like the god of the sea, and a big dude, and maybe that's him, maybe not, don't know. Come on. That might be Sardinia. The countries are widespread all over the planet. You can't deny it's a common symbol, very similar to what we found there on Poseidon's Island. On this next slide, I was telling you about the Santorini frescoes of the bull jumpers and whatever. In Plato's account, they do talk about the Atlantean kings and noblemen having the jumping of the bull games. And you can see where the guy gets in between the horns of the auroch and is thrown up, goes hand over onto the back, and then flips off the back and stands up and survives, hopefully. And that is from the Minoan area, about 3000 to 2000 BC. So that fits in with the time period that Atlantis actually was not sunk. And that's why I thought it might be an outpost of the Atlantean nation. Now, the dating they use in archaeology at the moment places it, the Santorini eruption at 1600 BC, which was about 800 years after the flood. So it doesn't fit there. But this is what we see today, cattle in Africa, the auroch. And Holly found this in her book. She reported it in the the Prophetic Perils. And she found that there's DNA evidence all over the planet that the herds of cattle all share a common DNA ancestor to 80 cows or cattle in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, which was part of Atlantis, where of course the Atlanteans worshiped the bull. And these arrows show that Fertile Crescent today, with Jordan and Iraq being on the outer perimeter of it. That's where every cow that we've got, our cattle, all the cattle come from that area, which is rather coincidental since that was what the Atlanteans worshipped. They took the history of 134 cattle breeds around the world and traced them back to that area. Now, when I did the 2014 Garden of Eden lecture, I found that the mitochondrial DNA of human women traced back to northern Tanzania to the Ngoro crater where the Garden of Eden was. Now we're just summarizing here, I'm getting this quickly, we're running a little bit over. You can read this, I'll read it with you. The areas and coastlines of ancient Libya and Asia Minor match the area and coastlines of Arabia. We've seen the keystone artifacts I was talking about, and they are a model of Poseidon's Island. That's two. Three things, we've got 2 water aquifers in Dammam in a region where hot springs still exist today. The rectangular plain has grooves in it to take the rainwater down and feed that rectangular plain, circle around and go in past the city of Atlantis and into the ocean, again, as they said. Now, the Gilgal circles in the Golan Heights were made by King Og, who was a giant. I think his bed was 18 feet long or something. And again, this is reminiscent of the Genesis 6 account of the Nephilim, the giants. The Greek Decapolis cities were established to be near, at least Gadarius of Atlantis. And of course, they named Gadara after him. Okay, Atlantis was destroyed by a flood and large earthquakes. The flood of Noah would have done the same thing. So I think that the two coincide. The Egyptian account that Plato quoted said that Atlantis sunk 9,000 BC, 9,000 years from that time, which would have been 11,000 years our time. The Straits of Hercules. Well, we found the missing Straits of Hercules there that I showed you, where the Orontes River empties into the Mediterranean between Turkey and Syria. That's interesting. I was thinking about Erdogan and the attempt to overthrow him. He's rising to be an interesting power in Turkey. Okay, I told you about the gold mine east of Jeddah with orichalcum, and then the fertile plain. Years ago, Bob just touched on it for a brief moment, but years ago, I was recruited to work for Dr. Edward Teller's people down in Australia to develop anti-gravity and various other types of propulsion for circular craft that we had secretly. And in essence, we still do. But in the late 70s, we had been helping supermen. The New Age movement might call them our alien elder brothers or something like that, but they were fallen angels. And they were human-like, and they had robots that were gray, and they were biological robots. They were soft tissue robots rather than mechanical ones like we use. We were kicked out of our bases that we helped them build underwater and under a pole and even some above ground, because once we had built the infrastructure, the mechanism for them to make their own weapons in a fight they're going to have with Yeshua, with Jesus in the time to come, they didn't need us anymore. And so we had a number of pitched battles and were kicked out. So what we have as technology and anti-gravity today for our own use is rather limited, because these guys control the numbers across the planet. They're here again, and they are breeding. You've heard of the abduction cases where the women have been impregnated with something, and they get pregnant and they have a strange-looking humanoid child. And these are products of the crossbreeding that these fallen ones are doing right now for a couple of purposes. One, to make hosts for them to control, like avatars, and the other just to use as servants to go and collect information or to impregnate, capture people and do things with them DNA-wise. One of my security guards in the program told me about a base that we had in Saudi Arabia, probably still do, I guess, I don't know. And it was 120 kilometers outside of Riyadh, where the green arrow points to that arc. In that little arc in the Tuwaiq Mountains, there was an alien and human base combined. And here is a portion of a secret base in that area. When I found it on Bing, I screen snapped several of them. I've got more pictures of it up close, because it had unusual structures on the top of these hangars, or whatever they are. They don't look like normal hangars where planes taxi out and fly off to an airstrip. These things go straight up in the air. Whatever's there comes right out of the top. I went back to Bing, and the area no longer exists. And I went back within an hour of screen snapping, and they must have found my IP address and just blocked it. I know the texture of the land, the color of the land, I know where it was, and I've gone over it inch by inch, and it's just gone. Anyway, I did have enough to show you there, so I thought I'd share that with you. Okay, in Daniel 11:36, I've covered this in the 2010 version of the Cosmic Conspiracy, where the Antichrist will honor an alien god. And they, before our time, the theologians would say, well, that's a foreign god, something not common to his people. It's an alien god, and we have those fallen ones who are not of our race, not of human race, and they are super powerful. And this is part of a plan that was formed after World War II to convince the people of earth to accept a race of people that have obviously solved war and are peaceful and have super technology. They have no religious preference, no cultural bias here on the earth. They don't belong to the Russians, the Chinese, or whatever. They are them. And this is the alien God that the Antichrist of this time will honor. He won't worship him, but he will honor him, and he's a God of forces. Now, it's a long discussion I'm not going to get into here. It is in that book. But the Antichrist and the false prophet are still kind of nebulous to a lot of us studying it. We think it could be this, it could be a Roman, blah, blah, blah. It could be an Arab, maybe not. But in Saudi Arabia, there's a guy coming to power that is he's checking so many boxes for Antichrist that I have to bring to your attention so you can watch and see. It's Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's the second in line to the throne of Saudi Arabia. His governorship, before he was appointed to do all the other things he does for his father, was Riyadh, where that base is. I was telling you about it. It's just outside of Riyadh. He's 30 years old. He started getting, as soon as his father took over the throne, because the old king died here a couple years back, as soon as he took over the throne, he started saying to his son, I want you to be the defense minister. I want you to be this minister. I want you to be that minister. And this is over. The actual guy that's supposed to inherit the throne, his cousin, Mohammed bin Nayef. And to separate the two in the court, they call Mohammed bin Nayef, the next in line, they called him MBN. And this guy, Mohammed bin Salman, they call MBS. Even in the press, it's MBS, MBN. And there's a rivalry between them, obviously. Now, he formed what is now a 39-nation alliance between Arab nations to fight terrorism in the region. So he's already accumulated an army, and they've already had joint exercises. This is Mohammed bin Salman. Interesting enough, his name, Solomon, comes from Shalmaneser I. You'll find it in biblical history as well. Shalmaneser I was 200 or 300 years before Solomon in the Israeli record. And Shalmaneser, his short form of his name was Solomon. Various translators have translated him one thing or another, but his deeds as the first king of Assyria, and we know the Antichrist is going to be an Assyrian, Solomon's first deeds were to unify all the warring tribes into the united, Assyrian nation. And we think that the pronunciation of that Solomon was confused over the ages with Solomon. In Hebrew, it's Shlomo, it's not Solomon. But they confused some of the deeds of this Solomon who dealt with demons and various other things and perhaps the fallen gods or whatever. And the two have been confused. But whether or not that's the truth, in Revelation 13, at the end of the chapter, it says, and the beast, which we think was the first beast being talked about after the second beast, the first beast, here is wisdom, 666, go look for it, right? You go back in the Bible to 666, that was King Solomon, who earned 666 talents of gold every year. Now, he was wise. His name was, in English, they say Solomon. So was that telling us to look for an Antichrist with Solomon in his name? In the Middle East, it's Solomon. And for those of you that put any stock in what Nostradamus writes, MBS they're the consonants of what Nostradamus said was Mabus, the third Antichrist, and the Arabic union forms the verbs, AU. So be that what it may. Now this fellow here, this guy we're looking at, is very popular among the young Saudis. He's changing the law. He's changing Sharia law. And that's part of what an Antichrist will do. Now, as I say, this is a candidate. I'm not saying he is the one yet. But he's softening Sharia law. He's made a deal with Six Flags of Texas to make a Six Flags tourist attraction there in Saudi Arabia to get tourism in. He's moving away from dependence on oil and going to mineral, gold, and tourism. Holly said to me, I guess it'd be pretty hard to be wearing a veil and a robe and go into the water slide, wouldn't it? True. But anyway, he's going to overcome that. He's trying to do that. So he may be the prince of the covenant because he's not the king. he may go for a bigger control and let his cousin Ben Nayef take the throne as he's supposed to. So keep an eye on young Prince Solomon. Oh, and the other thing here, you see that little like board behind that says 2030. This is part of the global plan to move people off of the land into concentrated cities called the ICLEI cities, and he is there supporting it. So he's also been looking at numbering systems for money through their bank in Jeddah. This family, the Saud family, have a family wealth of $17 trillion. They could pay off our national debt with a pen stroke. They are rich and powerful. They are known, his family of the Wahhabi form of Islam. They have financed terrorism. They financed, bin Laden. And this guy, with the stroke of a pen, could deny funding to a lot of these terrorist groups and be a hero because ISIS disappears, no funding. He could send out a circular and say, look, okay, guys, stop now. We got what we want. The fly in the ointment for him is this. He's reckless, he's young, and he's irritated Iran. Iran wants to zap him back, different form of Islam. He wants to get nuclear missiles now, this MBS guy, so he can strike Iran with nuclear missiles because they've got nuclear missiles now. This guy has already formed a consortium of Arab nations that could make the Psalm 83 war and attack Israel. And when that happens, they'll be destroyed, not Israel, the Arab alliance. And what will be left over, will be taken over by Israel. This purple area here in the map is what new Israel will look like. They're not going to be happy about that. Now, I was talking to a couple of other speakers yesterday about this. The first beast, the Antichrist, seems to lose power after he is killed and being apparently raised from the dead. The second beast raises up images to him and that kind of stuff and says, let's do it in his name. I don't think he's going to be as powerful, but the second beast will use him as a power structure and bring fire down from the heavens and be making the numbering. So there are a lot of factors at play here that I'm throwing out to you to say, look, put these together as the current events happen. If you know these factors, then you can see who it is. There's a couple more I'm going to mention here. And by the way, Shalmaneser the Great, the first one, I was talking about the ancestor of the Sauds. He had a fire weapon called the Nergal that went before his troops, and every other army was decimated before it. It was a strange technological weapon, and even his son, Shalmaneser II, used this Nergal to kill the enemies ahead of them. Fire from the heaven, the Antichrist being fired down from the heaven in the sight of men. Maybe there will be a play on that with this new Solomon. Now here's another Solomon in the area, Qasim Soleimani, a general in Iran. He's been wounded, but he didn't die, and they didn't say he did. He's another possible candidate, a major player there. Bashar Assad of Syria. He practices a strange breed of Islam, which does communion and various things that Christians do, when they have their family dinners. He's born in Damascus, so he's definitely an Assyrian. That's, the ancient Syrian capital. This fellow here is in the news now. They tried to throw him out of office in a coup, military coup. He has recently been making overtures to Israel saying, look, I would like to import your oil into Turkey. And some of his, religious people there, I would call them, they're like a cult almost, but they have said, look, let's build the Temple of Solomon for Israel on the Temple Mount because Solomon was great. They idolize Solomon in Turkey. And so does Erdogan. He fancies himself really as a new Solomon. So watch this guy. When they said that the coup was going to take him out, I said, wait, I don't think he's gone. Sure enough, he's back. He's a very egotistical. He has a mean countenance. There are just a number of things that fit him too. And Walid Shabat said that Erdogan has proclaimed himself to be God. Now, Bashar Assad, the last one here, he has instructed his troops in the past to tell the population that he is God. He is greater than Allah. So, young Prince Mohammed bin Salman hadn't done that kind of stuff yet, but this is another player that we've got to watch. And then this one here, oops, and this fun one here. Come on, let me have it. There we go. And that's the truth. It's no joke. He said he would baptize aliens if they wanted to. So here's another player in the game. And by the way, the Vatican has made strong overtures to the Club of Rome, which is a civilian, civil organization, scientific organization that in 1978 published a report, which I put in the Cosmic Conspiracy on page 200, showing they had computer modeled the entire planet and broken the planet up into 10 regions, the entire planet. And that's 10 regions, perhaps the 10 kings. And now he is making overtures to them about how do we set up this thing worldwide. It's, as I say, perhaps the church will be gone when this happens. The rapture will occur and we'll be gone before the Antichrist is revealed. But if we share this with people that are going to be behind after we're gone, then at least they have a clue as to what's happening. Now here, Obama gives obeisance, like servitude to King Solomon. I mean, he bowed down to the floor in a couple of places to these guys over there. It's got to tell you that something's up. And he's met with young King Solomon even this year in the last month, discussing something or other. We're not sure what. Lastly, we're finishing up now. The 7 hills of the city that the Antichrist, he's going to be ruling from there apparently. We have the 7 hills of Athens. We have the 7 hills of Istanbul, which doesn't show. Anyway, the 7 hills of Jerusalem even, and the 7 hills of Rome. Interesting, the Vatican's in the upper left-hand corner across the river from the 7 hills of Old Rome.